Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we are tracking two major political stories. The Democratic National Committee finally releasing its autopsy of the 2024 campaign today after intense pressure to make the document public, and despite the DNC chair saying just last month it would not be released. We have more on that in just a few minutes, but we do want to begin with President Trump, whose top priorities could imperil his Capitol Hill agenda, as some Republicans warn he could jeopardize Republicans' chances in the midterms. Nowhere is that more evident than the fight over the Trump administration's controversial $1.8 billion fund to provide payments to Americans who claim to be victims of what the White House calls weaponization by the Biden administration. Today, Republicans in both the House and Senate canceled planned votes on a bill to fund ICE and Border Patrol because of objections to the White House push for the so-called anti-weaponization fund. That's according to two sources familiar with the discussion. It comes after Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche met today with Senate Republicans as the party debates putting guardrails on the fund in that bill. Speaking to reporters this afternoon, Majority Leader John Thune said he wishes the White House had consulted him first.
Did the White House consult you in advance about this victimization fund? And, I mean, would you have advised it against doing that at this point?
Well, it would have been nice if they had consulted. I think they probably would have gotten plenty of advice from lots of folks about it. But it's water under the bridge now, and, you play the hand you're dealt.
The small but notable number of Republicans pushing back against this fund are frequent Trump critics and lawmakers who are either not running for re-election or who were primaried by President Trump. Back candidates. Take a listen.
What do you want to hear from Todd Blanche?
About the payout pot for punks? Not a lot. Look, under what circumstances would it ever make sense to provide restitution for people who were either pled guilty or were found guilty in a court of law?
Do you think you have colleagues that share the same concerns that you're expressing?
Yeah, they do. They need to speak up. I mean, this is beyond the pale.
We got to unpack exactly what it is, what the source of the funding is, in order to stop it and or reverse it, right?
You want to stop it?
Oh, 100%.
And Senator Cassidy criticized the fund on social media, writing, quote, "People are concerned about paying their mortgage or rent, affording groceries, and paying for gas, not about putting together a $1.8 billion fund for the president and his allies to pay whomever they wish with no legal precedent or accountability." It comes as polling shows the president's approval rating has hit new lows, driven in part by voters' disapproval over President Trump's handling of key issues. Chief among them, the cost of living and the Iran war, with a new poll showing more than 3/4 of voters blaming Trump administration policies for rising gas prices. Senator Tom Tillis warning if the president doesn't focus on issues that matter to voters, Republicans could lose in November.
The president's not up for re-election this year or ever. We are. And we're being forced to take policy votes that are not helpful to the electorate. The president's priorities right now have to be second to what we need to do to keep control of Congress, in my opinion.
Another of the president's priorities creating tension within his own party, the $1 billion in funding for security-related construction for the White House ballroom that Republican senators are seeking to strip from the bill.
There's no architectural plans. There is no environmentals. There's no engineering. There's no sense of, when we asked, how did it happen to cost exactly $1 billion?
Today, the president dismissing any dissent within the Republican ranks as he again insisted the ballroom will be privately funded.
Are you losing control of the Senate Republican?
I don't know. I really don't know. I can tell you, I only do what's right. I don't need money for the ballroom. I'm making a gift of the ballroom. The money that they're spending is for security, having to do maybe around the ballroom and other parts of the house, but this is not for the ballroom. If they want to spend money on securing the White House, I think it would be very, very much a good expenditure, but the ballroom is being built.
Well, what if Congress doesn't sign off on the security money, sir?
Then the White House won't be a very secure place.
Joining me now is Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, and NBC's Monica Alba is at the White House. Thanks to both of you for joining me. Ryan, I want to start with you on Capitol Hill because big developments there. The Senate and House deciding to leave town without voting on the big reconciliation bill over objections over what I was just talking about, this so-called weaponization fund. What are the implications? Where does it all go from here?
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of the situation here, Kristen, but I do believe that today could be a turning point. This may be the day that Donald Trump finally broke the Congress, certainly the United States Senate. What I thought was so compelling about your introduction here and how you laid it all out so artfully was that all of the opposition that you showed in opposition to the White House and the administration's moves today were all Republicans. This is the first time that we've seen a defined and organized effort by Republicans in Congress to stand up and reject something that the White House has put forward. And what the Senate did today, which I think is particularly interesting, is that they took a piece of legislation that is widely supported by Republicans, and that's the extension of Customs and Border Patrol funding and ICE funding through the balance of the Trump administration, something that was removed from the DHS appropriations package during that lengthy DHS shutdown. And they put it on hold specifically because they have concerns about this GOP weaponization fund that the Department of Justice has introduced as a result of this settlement. It wasn't even a part of the legislation. It has nothing to do with the legislation. But this is something that Donald Trump really wants in terms of the reconciliation funding, that ICE and Border Patrol funding. And Republicans in the Senate decided they needed to send a message to the White House that you're not going to get what you want here unless you deal with this thing over here that we are very upset with. We have not seen this sort of forceful pushback by Republicans in Congress since this version of the Trump administration.
Ryan, it's absolutely striking to hear you talk about this moment in those terms, that this may be the moment that actually broke Republicans in Congress. So let me ask you, broadly speaking, what does all of this mean about the potential future path for this reconciliation bill? Do you anticipate that it gets done when Congress comes back?
Well, they're going to have more than a week to sit and take a step back and try and figure out the next path forward. There, I'm sure, is some hope within the Republican ranks that the White House takes a second look at this weaponization fund and either decides to scrap it altogether or dramatically change it or work with Congress to actually craft some sort of statute that would put guardrails around it and make it more appropriate than where they view it as it currently being. But I do believe, Kristen, that this could just be a harbinger for the future. It's not just this weaponization fund that has angered Republicans, particularly in the Senate. It also comes on the heels of Bill Cassidy losing his primary on Sunday after Donald Trump forcefully endorsed another candidate, basically sending an incumbent packing. It comes after he chose to endorse Ken Paxton over the incumbent Senator John Cornyn in Texas, making the possibility of the Senate that much more difficult for the Republicans to retain in the fall. It feels as though Senate Republicans feel that they've done a lot to stick their necks out for Donald Trump, and he has not returned that favor. So there's a long list of things that Congress would like to get done in the foreseeable future, that ICE and Border Patrol funding being the first thing, but there's talk of a third potential reconciliation package. There's a whole spending bill that's going to need to come up to fund all of the government in September. And let's not forget that the White House and the Pentagon are prepared to ask for potentially hundreds of $millions in funding for the war effort in Iran. It's going to be a much tougher ask given the current environment.
There's no doubt about that. Let me head to Monica at the White House. Monica, weigh in on what Ryan is saying here. Based on your conversations with sources inside the administration, is there any sense that President Trump might back away from or put guardrails around this anti-weaponization fund? What are you hearing?
It is certainly unlikely that this is something the president would want to do, Kristen, but whether he is going to have to be forced into at least considering that or making any changes to the way this fund may operate does seem like something that the White House is going to at least have to contend with and confront. And what's really interesting is that we just spotted a few moments ago Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche arrive here at the White House. Now, he is a frequent visitor here. He has meetings all the time with the president and with others, so it's not unusual for him to be here. But the fact that he was just on Capitol Hill earlier today in that meeting with those lawmakers that clearly came out of that discussion unpleased, unimpressed, and unsatisfied with some of those answers does maybe suggest that there is a larger conversation that is now taking place within the Trump administration. We've asked the White House if that is why he's here or if they are discussing any number of other issues. But that is something certainly to watch for. And we will know, Kristen, I think pretty soon whether the president feels that anything is going to shift here or whether there's going to be a change. But I think it's fascinating, the collision of storylines that have so much important overlapping elements to them here. The fact that you have this massive $1.8 billion fund that is made up of taxpayer money, the $1 billion that if Congress were to appropriate for the ballroom security enhancements, also taxpayer money. These are the two things that are sort of dominating the conversation on a day where the president was trying to bring some attention to what they view as their affordability pitch and trying to make that the sort of dominant message of the day. And again, you have these other competing stories that are very important for the president, things that he has touted, that he's trying to prioritize, but that ultimately just are at odds with the other kind of economic message that he's trying to put out there.
Monica, let me ask you, because all of this comes as, yet again, as you heard me lay out at the top of the show, the president's facing more poll numbers which show that voters are dissatisfied and disapproving of his handling of a range of different issues, from inflation, negative 55%, Monica, cost of living, economy, Iran, negative 34%. How is the White House internally responding to this feedback from the public?
Yeah, they're trying to schedule more events like the one that he had earlier today, where he was trying to say that this rollback of EPA regulations from the Biden administration could potentially help Americans cut their grocery prices in some way. Experts and critics say that that is unlikely to happen in the short term. So it's always sort of apparent in the background, but it is certainly something that obviously is being taken in with all of these other major issues. And the president has said as much publicly. The ballroom is such a priority for him. It takes up so much of his time and attention, and that has certainly been the case today. And they are certainly, he says, going to continue with the construction, even though it is potentially facing legal hurdles in addition to challenges on Capitol Hill, too.
All right. Ryan Nobles, Monica Alba, thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. Joining me now is former Arizona Republican Senator Jeff Flake. Senator Flake, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to delve into all of these issues, but I want to start off by getting your take on what you just heard from my colleague, Ryan Nobles, on Capitol Hill. He said this could potentially be the moment that these issues that the president has presented before Congress, this fund to repay his allies who he feels have been mistreated, asking for money for the ballroom, this may be the moment where you are finally seeing Republicans push back in a significant way. What do you make of that? Do you think that's an accurate assessment? What do you make of this moment that Republicans are in?
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a perfect storm here. A couple of things. One, you're getting past the filing deadlines for primaries. So what every Republican who is up for election, a third of the Senate and all the House worries about is the president finding a primary opponent for you if he doesn't like what you're doing. That threat is going. But then what has angered so many Senate Republicans is the president supporting Bill Cassidy's opponent. That was bad enough because Bill Cassidy is a serious, good senator. Well-liked, but then also supporting Bill Paxton over John Cornyn. John Cornyn, obviously a conservative, good senator, well-liked. But in this case, it means Republicans are going to have to spend tons of money and tons of time trying to defend that seat in Texas. They won't have to do that in Louisiana, but that's going to happen in Texas. And then some of these things that Republicans simply cannot defend. This slush fund for the president's political allies, that just is not going to fly. And Republicans are rightly running away quickly from that. So, yeah, this is kind of a perfect storm. And it may be, this time you can point to it and say, this is when the great migration begins away from some of the president's policies and away from the fear that the president can target you.
Well, it is very striking to hear you lay it out in those terms, Senator. I want to follow up with you on the Senate race in Texas. We could spend the entire segment talking about it, but I do want to drill down on how you see this moment in Texas, because as you say, President Trump has now endorsed Ken Paxton. Do you think Democrats have a shot at actually winning that Senate seat if Paxton wins the runoff next week?
I think if John Cornyn were to win, I don't think that that's likely now, given the president's endorsement of Paxton. If Cornyn won, Democrats wouldn't have a chance. You wouldn't have to spend money there. With Paxton in the race, yes, Democrats have a shot. It's not a good one. This is Texas. But it's not something that you can take for granted. I mean, Bill Paxton is a very, very compromised candidate. There's a lot there. And Republicans are going to have to spend a ton of money and a lot of time defending that race. And that's time and money they could spend elsewhere. And so that's going to be really difficult. And then if Bill Paxton does make it to the Senate, you have that problem because he's a compromised candidate, has a lot of things in his past. And so it's kind of the Roy Moore situation that you saw in Alabama several years ago. So yeah, this is a big problem. And like I said, John Cornyn, 99% voting record with the president. Very well liked among his colleagues, a very serious senator, and have the president oppose him simply because he didn't defend him strongly enough after January 6th.
I want to get you to weigh in on how some of your former colleagues are viewing this moment for them. This is what Senator Thom Tillis had to say about how he's choosing to approach this moment. Take a look.
People say you're really speaking a lot more openly, and I say the same thing, and I'm going to say it again here. No shit, Sherlock. I don't have to think about the words that I use anymore, right?
Okay.
If I were running for re-election, I'd probably use a few different words, try to communicate the same thing like I did in Trump 1. Right. But I just don't have to deal with that filter.
It's a pretty honest assessment. What do you make of what Senator Tillis said right there?
That was an honest assessment. And the bigger problem, the bigger problem for the president, as Ryan Nobles pointed out, it's not just legislation or the agenda directly that the president wants. It's that if some of these other things pop up, like this slush fund, then certain senators will say, well, hey, I'm not going to vote for this other thing that we really need, or I'm going to use that as leverage now to get you to back off of this crazy idea to fund your political allies. So you're going to see a lot happen in the Senate and in the House that as members say, hey, we don't have to worry about primaries anymore. We're past the filing deadline or past the primary. And we better worry about, a November where there are going to be considerable headwinds already without some of these things that the president is putting forward now.
Senator Jeff Flake, it is so informative and insightful to have your perspective in this moment. Thank you. We do hope you'll come back and join us again soon.
Love to. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Coming up, inside the DNC's 2024 long-delayed autopsy on why Democrats lost the 2024 presidential election. What's in it? What's not in it? And who's to blame for what went wrong? Plus, The View from Battleground, Georgia. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms joins us days after notching a decisive victory in the Democratic governor's primary in a state at the center of both parties' midterm strategies. Stay with us. A lot coming up. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the Democratic National Committee has finally released its long-awaited autopsy report of the 2024 election. It follows months of speculation about what the report would say about what went wrong for Democrats and how Vice President Harris lost the race to Donald Trump. And it comes as Democrats are trying to carve out their path for 2028, with a source telling NBC News Harris is, quote, thinking about another presidential bid. DNC Chair Ken Martin has been facing pressure for months after he first promised to release the report and then reversed course.
What's in the report that you wouldn't want
first off,
to publicize?
There's no smoking gun in the report, and I know that's what everyone's so eager to learn. The smoking gun. Guess what, John?
But if there's no smoking gun, why wouldn't you just release it then?
Because we want to keep the focus on the lessons.
The DNC released the report today after CNN obtained a copy, with Martin saying in a statement, For full transparency, I am releasing the report as we received it. It does not meet my standards. He adds he's doing it because people need to be able to trust the Democratic Party and trust our world. NBC News has learned that Martin called DNC members today to apologize and said that the author of the report is no longer with the DNC. Joining me now is NBC News senior national politics reporter Natasha Korecki. Natasha, thanks so much for joining us. I know you have been working on this day in and day out, and you've been working your sources today. What more are you learning about what led to the decision to release the report today? Why did it take so long, Natasha?
He finally succumbed under pressure. When I say he, it's DNC Chair Ken Martin. One of the things that he said in a call, and we reported this earlier, one of the things he said in a call to some of his members today was that he could bear it. He could bear all the pressure. But what he started seeing was that potential 2028 contenders were getting asked about the autopsy, and it became bigger than him, and it became such a distraction. And it was doing exactly what he was trying to prevent from doing. So he did release it. We also reported exclusively that Governor Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania governor, spoke with Ken Martin last week and also pressured him. We also reported previously that Kamala Harris asked him to do it. And as you have reported, Cory Booker also called on him to release this report. So he's been under enormous amount of pressure to release this report.
Yeah, that is a mountain of pressure that you lay out there, Natasha. So you've been looking into this report throughout the day. What are the biggest takeaways here from your perspective?
Well, there are many takeaways. One of them is they started too late with the negative advertising on Trump. They didn't land the negative ads. Were not landing the way they did, but they took too long. That was one of them. There was not enough messaging coordination between the outside PAC, Future Forward, and the actual campaign. One of the biggest things that this underscored was Kamala Harris and how the White House, they faulted the White House with Biden White House with how they had prepared Kamala Harris, which was to say they did not prepare her. And I'm going to read this part from the report. The White House did not position or prepare the vice president. Had the White House explored and evaluated ways to leverage Kamala Harris earlier in the administration, perhaps it would have improved the president's standing, and it could certainly have helped prepare her to lead the ticket. So all of those things played into this.
Well, let me ask you, because what's also notable, Natasha, there are some critical questions it doesn't answer, some areas that it didn't look into, like, for example, how the debate over the war in the Middle East was playing out. What do you know about that, about what's missing?
And that is why this is not going to die down. This is why this is not going to be put to rest by him releasing this today. Even though people have publicly said that they were interviewed by DNC officials and the person Ken Martin put in charge of it, Paul Rivera, about Gaza, and they said that it was a material aspect to why she lost, or it contributed to it. There was zero mention of it in this report. No mention at all. And so that a lot of people are already, up in arms about that. Where is it? Why wasn't it mentioned? So that question is going to continue to dog them as this moves forward.
I think you're absolutely right. Natasha Korecki, thanks for bringing us your exclusive reporting. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, we'll get the panel's take on this long-awaited DNC report. Plus, those big developments on Capitol Hill today with Republicans pushing back on the president. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Joining me now is our panel, Dan Merrick, co-author of the early brief for The Washington Post, Ashley Etienne, former communications director for Vice President Harris and a Meet the Press contributor, and Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Boy, is there a lot to unpack today, Dan. We have to start with this DNC report. Ken Martin releasing it under an immense amount of pressure. Talk about the politics of this moment for Democrats and for the DNC.
I mean, there's clearly an incredible amount of pressure on Ken Martin to get this thing out, much of his own making. I mean, he kind of put himself in this position by saying that they were going to release it, calling for a report to be made, backtracking from that. And you saw that in his statement. Rare that you see a political figure say, I'm sorry, and apologize the way he did for making this kind of snafu and really dragging the DNC through the mud through this process. I mean, I think there are a lot of Democrats, especially here in Washington, who were eager to see this report and are let down by what is and what is not in the report. It is certainly not a complete product. I'm shocked by the annotations that the DNC has put in the report that they were supposed to produce. I will note that there are not many operatives out in the country running campaigns right now who were waiting on to find out what the DNC thinks they should do in 2026, and that's mostly because they're running campaigns and they're not looking towards the DNC necessarily. I talked to an operative who's working on a few races who said, great, we're running our own race, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're so deeply immersed already in their own races. This is not a game changer for them. But Ashley, you've been one of the voices calling for this report to be released. So your reaction to it being released today, and for you, what are the biggest takeaways?
Well, for me, my first reaction is this is a complete and total failure on the part of Ken Martin. He had a choice. Ken Martin chose to release what I've been told is a draft document with critiques to a draft document. And part of the issue there is he released it to protect his own hide. You know, that's the part I find most insulting. He could have released a forward-looking document that really dug into the biggest, the three-alarm fire, as I call it, that the Democratic Party is facing. It's facing a failing infrastructure, an identity crisis, and bleeding support among its base vote voters. He could have put some recommendations forward. Rather, what he did was he put out a document to throw the writers of the report under the bus. He made this about himself when democracy is under attack right now. And so if you ask me, he owes people like me an explanation. The people like me who've been the backbone of this political party for generations now. 600,000 black women are out of a job. We're at 8.5% unemployment. 400 years of black political progress has been undermined in the past 2 weeks with the gutting of the VRA. Ken Martin owes black people an explanation as to why he's been sitting on this document and what happened to all the money. That is the biggest takeaway. There is no unpacking of how the money was spent, how it was strategically spent, whether it was spent to advance innovation, innovative strategies to win black voters and brown voters. I mean, it's really, again, a failure of leadership on the part of Ken Martin.
Let me follow up with you quickly, because Dan Pfeiffer, former Obama advisor, also outraged by Ken Martin, posting on social media, it's hard to imagine anyone handling anything worse than Ken Martin handled the DNC autopsy. It was a disaster of his own making, and it's sufficient evidence that he is not the right person to lead the DNC at this time. Are you saying you agree with Dan Pfeiffer?
No, I agree with that. I mean, again,
he should go. Ken Martin should go?
I think he should. I mean, but before he leaves, I think we need an explanation as to what happened to the money, because everything flows from the money. As I said on Meet the Press, there's speculation that people were making decisions to line their pockets and not win this election. That is deplorable.
Sarah, let me read you part of this report. It says, focus less on abstract issues and identity politics and connect with voters on the issues they say matter most, including the economy, disaster relief, and addressing housing affordability. As Republicans read this report, what are the takeaways for you? And is there a concern that Democrats are going to shift into an affordability-only focused message, which we have seen in some of these races so far this past year?
Well, the best thing going for Republicans is Ken Martin. I'm sorry. We don't think they're going to do that. They have no idea what they're doing. I mean, the incompetence is shocking coming out of the Democratic Party when they do have an opportunity to go after the Republicans. I mean, certainly we've opened the door on the economy and all of those issues, but they're so busy fighting about a report that is incomplete at best, and a man who cannot run the agency. I mean, there's $17 million in debt and they have $14 million. I mean, it's truly the best thing we have going into this election, this midterm election.
Dan, I think it's safe to say that reporters like you and I are going to be focused on what happens next with Ken Martin in the coming days and weeks. But I want to ask you about another part of this report, which is actually positive for Harris. It says having Kamala Harris on the ballot actually helped down-ballot Democrats maintain part of their base support. Had Biden remained on the ballot, down-ballot Democrats might have faced even steeper challenges. We know that the former vice president is considering another run. Do you think this bolsters her argument for making another go at it?
I mean, I think there are certainly things in the report that you could cherry pick from it and say bolsters anyone's argument that it's maybe somebody who is outside of this Biden world will probably pull things from it that say they would be the right person to run in the future. There are certainly, it was pretty well known at the time that Vice President Harris becoming the nominee and Joe Biden stepping aside helped down ballot Democrats because there was less of a conversation about age, there was less of a focus on Biden's frailty, and that helped down ballot Democrats who didn't have an answer for that. That's not exactly a revelatory thing that I think a year-long report was needed to assess. But I think the vice president is going to run for president or not, and I don't think it's going to be because of something in the DNC report. I would imagine that most of us are going to turn and focus on these campaigns that are running in these states, and the folks who are running these campaigns, I would argue, largely don't care about the takeaways in this report because it doesn't necessarily impact their day-to-day lives and how they're running their campaigns. That probably includes Harris.
But the reality is, just to clarify a couple of things, the reason why it matters to state-level parties is because, again, if we made decisions, if strategic decisions were made to put a lot of money on television and not invest in building the infrastructure of the state parties, that affects those local races. There's a lot in this document that is not unpacked, and that's why my issue is it's not what's in it, because none of it that's in it is groundbreaking. It's what's not included. The issue of Gaza, which we're seeing affect all of these races all over the country, how the money was spent with strategic decisions. We're getting our butts kicked by Republicans on the ground. They're building new modern information ecosystems that we've not even started to invest in. I've been in the party 25 years, and the same 5 to 8 people have been making all the strategic decisions and all the money. So that's really the question, is how the money was spent.
You guys, when Obama was president, you were way ahead of us with the technology, and we've caught up and actually passed all.
My point is more that some of these campaigns in these states have moved on, and they're focused on what is at need right now and what's pressing right now. I'm not arguing that it's not an important conversation to have, but some of these campaigns have moved on.
Dan's point is that it's so past the point of when it should have been released. Also, the campaigns are already focused on what's ahead of them, which is they're about to face.
Yeah, but the way campaigns work is that you have the. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry.
No, let me just ask you just to button this up, because one of the big findings was there wasn't enough focus actually on attacking President Trump early enough. Is that something, a lesson that Democrats should take in the midterms and beyond into 2028?
I mean, I still don't see us attacking Donald Trump in any robust way that's actually penetrating. I mean, I don't. I mean, I recommended that to the Democratic leaders, Schumer and Jeffries, almost a year ago that they needed to take on this issue of corruption. And they just announced 3 weeks ago that they're going to form a task force. 9 months, and you've not been talking about the corruption of this administration in any sort of robust way. I mean, it's a complete failure. But that's also why you need an autopsy, to really unpack these issues and to make recommendations for the totality of the party and the entire ecosystem.
Sarah, final point on that.
Well, all I have to say as a Republican strategist, we are thrilled that Nancy Pelosi is retiring, because this would not have happened with Nancy Pelosi's leadership in the House of Representatives.
All right, guys. Well, great discussion. We could have it for another hour, but I really appreciate you all being here to discuss this news today, Dan, Ashley, and Sarah. Coming up next, my one-on-one interview with former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms on her race for the governor's mansion and the future of the Democratic Party. That interview's next on Meet the Press Now. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back. After this week's big primaries, the race for Georgia governor is taking shape, at least on one side of the ticket. On Tuesday, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms secured the Democratic nomination after winning more than 50%, avoiding a runoff. But her opponent in November is still up in the air, with Republican Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and billionaire Rick Jackson advancing to a June runoff. Joining me now is former mayor of Atlanta and Democratic nominee for Georgia governor, Keisha Lance Bottoms. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So you won your primary outright. You avoided a runoff. As you know, though, Georgia has not elected a Democratic governor in more than 2 decades. You don't know who your opponent's going to be yet, but what is your strategy to flip that seat?
Well, we did win outright, winning, I believe, 158 of the 159 counties in the state. And we're going to keep taking our message directly to the voters across this state. I've been around this state multiple times over the course of the last year during this campaign. We've been in rural communities, urban cities, just speaking directly to people about what they care about. And what we are hearing repeatedly is that the chaos coming out of Washington, D.C. is making their lives more difficult. This cost of living conversation comes up in every community. And then we've not expanded Medicaid in Georgia. So you add that to the list of problems that we have in terms of rural hospitals that have closed across this state. And then those perennial issues around education. We're still in the bottom half in education in this country. So there are a lot of challenges facing this state, but people have been very responsive to our plans to help make their lives better.
You know, Mayor, in recent weeks, we have seen the power of President Trump's endorsement in this primary season. You're talking about the president now, but how do you counter that if the president does decide to invest resources and political capital in this race?
Well, you know, the president is actually doing a lot of work for us with the chaos that he is bringing to Georgia. It speaks for itself, and no amount of money and resources that are spent on the Republican side are going to counter what people are experiencing day to day. If you think about the Republican side in the state right now, I believe they're close to 100 million that they've already put in their personal fortunes, and Democrats still turned out in much higher numbers, very quietly, but very deliberately focused on making sure that their voices are reflected in their vote. And I truly believe that's a preview for what we can expect in November.
I have to ask you about this big news for Democrats today. As you know, the DNC's autopsy report of the 2024 election was released today. In it, it says, and I'm going to read you a little section of it, Democratic candidates have proven incapable of projecting strength, unity, and leadership, and voters have drifted away. You, of course, served under the Biden administration. I wonder if you feel like that was a fair assessment.
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to read the report, but I can tell you that as I'm talking directly to voters, what they are saying repeatedly is they just want to know how casting a vote, and that's for anyone, regardless of the party, how that's going to make a difference in their lives. So I believe that's probably a challenge that both parties are experiencing, because people are saying, I'm showing up to vote and I don't see that my community is getting any better. And as I'm moving around the state, I'm talking, but most importantly, I'm listening. And what I am hearing repeatedly is that people want their lives to be more stable. They want it to be more predictable in terms of whether or not they'll be able to pay for housing or have to make a choice between putting food on their table or putting gas in their car. Those are the conversations that I'm having. So I know that when we talk directly to people, listen to them, and then offer solutions for many of the challenges, then I think it works, it bodes well for us.
I know you haven't read the report yet. I want to read you a little bit more of what it has to say. It says that the Biden White House did not do enough to improve Vice President Harris's standing with the public way before the candidate switch. Again, you actually served in the Biden White House. Is that what you saw, Mayor Lance Bottoms?
You know, I can't speak to the politics of it. My service was as senior advisor for public engagement. I can just tell you my personal experience, and my charge was to work with both the president and Vice President Harris to make sure that we were engaging a cross-section of people across the country. So, of course, when you served, at least under the Biden administration, there was a separation between the politics and the work that we did inside the White House. But my experience was that, you know, we worked as a cohesive team to be able to deliver for people and engage people.
Well, one big picture point that the report makes is that Vice President Harris didn't attack President Trump early on in her campaign. So let me ask you big picture. What should Democrats, what should candidates like yourself learn from that?
Well, we know elections are about the future. So the biggest lesson with any campaign, if you are a smart candidate, you take a look at what worked well, you build from there, and those things that could have been done better, then you do better. I know right now Donald Trump is a central reason that people feel that their families don't have the financial stability that they need. And that their lives are more challenging right now. So he's going to be a topic of conversation through the midterms. I served as mayor of Atlanta under the first Trump administration, and it's in keeping with the uncertainty that he brings to the people of Georgia. So, you know, I can't speak to what the strategy was just in terms of messaging previously, but I can tell you he comes up very organically as we're moving around the state, and I would imagine that's the experience of anybody who's running for office right now.
And just to follow up with you, to what extent do you plan to focus on President Trump and the Trump agenda? Will that be a centerpiece of your campaign, Mayor?
Well, the centerpiece is going to be, again, just making sure I'm talking to people about how I will deliver for them. But a huge part of that is about how you push back against Donald Trump and, again, the chaos that he brings to people across his country. Right here in Georgia, over $200 million has been cut from our Department of Education. We've seen these cuts at the CDC that trickle directly into our public health clinics and our other entities that help support rural health care across this country. We've seen cuts to Veterans Affairs, and the list goes on. So it's difficult to campaign in Georgia without bringing up Trump, because he's the source of a lot of the challenges that we are facing, and the MAGA wing of this Republican Party in the state of Georgia. His endorsed candidate, who is now in a runoff, was an election denier, a huge supporter of Trump and his policies. And the person he's facing is a billionaire who's trying to curry favor with Trump. So I would imagine he's going to come up quite a bit.
Let me ask you, because you are running for governor, so you thereby have an interest in the future of the Democratic Party overall. And the big question in the wake of this report being released, should Vice President Harris run for president again in 2028? Do you think the former vice president should run for president again in 2028? Is she the strongest candidate?
Listen, I have a lot of respect for Vice President Harris, but I am focused on my race. I can't think toward 2028 right now. I'm trying to get through November in Georgia, and then we'll all turn our attention to the presidential. But I'm focused on the people of Georgia and the race that's in front of me right now, and that's my election as governor in November.
All right. Well, we're going to be covering your race very closely, including when you do have a candidate that you'll be running against. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And still to come, the AI effect as the debate over regulating the technology surges into the political arena. We'll talk to one of the candidates running in a key New York congressional race that includes a Kennedy family member. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Trump has postponed the signing of an executive order related to artificial intelligence. The president was expected to sign that order this afternoon, but told reporters he had concerns about its potential impact on the economy. The issue of AI is playing prominently in a closely watched and crowded congressional primary in New York City to replace retiring Congressman Jerry Nadler, where the candidates include a member of the Kennedy family. Alex Boris, a state assembly member who sponsored a far-reaching AI safety bill, is at the center of a proxy war between tech industry leaders over regulating AI and is being attacked on the airwaves by a pro-AI super PAC. Alex Boris joins me now. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start off by just getting you to respond to President Trump. He was supposed to sign that AI executive order today. He decided to postpone it amid concerns about the economy. I know you don't know every word that was in that executive order, but what do you make of that and that tension between expanding access to AI and potential concerns about the economy?
Trump, who bounces from idea to idea, almost went in the right direction. Now, I'm not actually sure that the program as designed would get all the benefits that we would want. I would want to see the word-by-word pieces of it, but he's spent at least a year and a half claiming that there should be no regulation of AI whatsoever and mirroring what his mega donors have been saying, even though 80% of Americans want to see guardrails put on AI that keeps us safe from the absolute worst outcomes.
Let's talk about you. You sponsored what's called the RAISE Act, which regulates AI in New York as a member of the state assembly. Would you intend to sponsor similar legislation if you were to win in November?
Absolutely. And in fact, I would go further than what we've done in the RAISE Act. And I would note that so many people that opposed some of the things I wanted to do before have now embraced it. Even OpenAI has recently been saying that they praise the RAISE Act and are praising an Illinois bill that has audit provisions, third-party audit provisions that are copied from an earlier version of the RAISE Act. So the vision that we put forward in last year and even before when I drafted in 2024 has just been proven correct. It's now time to have a federal standard that keeps us safe not only from catastrophic risks, which is what the RAISE Act focuses on, but the impact on our kids, the impact on the labor force, the impact on our climate and environment. This is a place that is screaming for government action, and it's time we get it done.
All right, let's turn to your primary now. You are facing, as you well know, a very crowded field of candidates to succeed Jerry Nadler, including Michael Lasher, who Nadler has endorsed, and Jack Schlossberg, an heir to the Kennedy lineage. How do you break through here? What's your strategy to win and, frankly, beat a Kennedy?
I'm focused on what I am hearing from my neighbors, and they are talking about the cost of living and how it keeps going up, and they have a federal regime that campaigned on lowering prices, but has done anything since, has just been serving the same oligarchs that got them there. I've been talking about corruption in government and the fact that Trump in the first quarter of this year made a stock trade every 6.5 minutes and is just doing it based on insider trading. We need to ban the president and members of Congress from trading stocks. And more, they're coming up and talking to me about AI. When I launched the campaign, I thought, I'm not really going to mention it. I'm already known nationally for pushing this forward. Time magazine named me one of the 100 most influential people in the world in AI for passing the RAISE Act. But I tell you, more and more neighbors are coming up to me and saying, hey, what's going on as they're rolling it out in my kids' elementary school? How should I be reacting to that? What's going to happen to the my new grad's job? How do I prepare them for the economy that's coming? How much of the rise in my utility bills comes from AI? And so this has been the case of an issue that I've been talking about strongly for some time now, is now raising up in everyone's mind.
I do want to ask you about the big news for Democrats today, the DNC releasing its autopsy from the 2024 election. What was your reaction to the fact that it took this long, and what were your key takeaways?
It took too long and also wasn't thorough at all. This is a serious set of questions for us to grapple with. How have we lost to Donald Trump twice now, but after seeing everything that he did in his first term, this is not a person that we should be losing to. The DNC should be diving really seriously into some hard questions about how we can make progress in the future. And I think it's quite clear that the report was not up to that standard.
So let me ask you, if Democrats do win back the House in November, do you have confidence in Hakeem Jeffries to be the House Speaker? And what do you think the first priority should be?
Yes, I intend to vote for Speaker Jeffries. I'll note also no one else is running, and he's done a great job of legislating from the minority and getting dispatch petitions there, et cetera. But we should hold all our leaders to a high standard, and I'll hope to keep doing that. And the first priority is a ethics package, is ending this corruption that we're seeing from government. We need to prove to Americans that government can actually solve problems for them, that we are working on their behalf. And we do that by holding ourselves to a high ethical standard and then actually delivering real results for people that impact their bills, that lower their cost of living, that protect them from AI and protect them from the threats that they're seeing.
And what about your fellow New Yorker, Chuck Schumer? Should he remain as Senate leader after this year's midterms?
I will leave questions about the Senate to the Senate. I am running for the House right now. I've had a very productive relationship with Senator Schumer. And as I said, we should hold all of our leaders to a very high standard.
We have about 30 seconds left. Do you think New York Democrats should continue to pursue redistricting efforts ahead of the 2028 election, given this war over redistricting?
Absolutely, yes, while also being clear that when we control all of Congress and the presidency, we will pass a national ban on partisan gerrymandering. That is the other side of the coin of the ethics that we hold ourselves to of not trading stocks, is having a fair election system with bans on partisan gerrymandering, campaign finance reform, actually having voters choose their elected officials and not elected officials choose their voters.
All right, New York Assemblyman Alex Boris, thank you very much for your time. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There's much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.